That's fine. Most of it's just repeating what I already said, but that way you can, you can at least take a look at it. So we've gotten through chapter 15, and we're going to get into chapter 16 now. So let's go ahead and go to that. Chapter 16, verse 1. Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. That's the whole point. That's why Abram's so confused. I'm supposed to have this heir, but it's going to be Eleazar. And he says, no, you're going to have an heir from your own person. It's going to issue from you. She had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar. So this is likely someone, a young woman that they picked up while they were sojourning in Egypt the first time, when Pharaoh had helped Abram to become very wealthy in return for, not putting hands on his wife. So he kicks him out of Egypt. So Hagar likely came to them from that point, and they brought her up out of Egypt when they came back into Canaan. There are several different Jewish traditions that hold that Hagar was actually a daughter of the Pharaoh. And that was an attempt to, this was very common to try to tie the two lines together to establish sort of a covenant, a relationship between the two families. So this is not out of the realm of possibility. It's entirely possible that this occurred, but we don't know. We just simply know that she was an Egyptian servant. All right. So Sarai said to Abram, "Behold, now the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Is this true? Is this a correct accusation that Sarai has before Abram?" Well, he has not allowed her to have it yet. I don't know if it's necessarily that he's prevented it, but he's not allowed it. But part of the reason that God waited as long as he did was to show his power before Abram. He could have let him have children a long time ago, but he's holding that as an example of his ability and of his power, and allowing Abram's faith to grow as it goes on. And remember, the entire time he's let him know, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. And Abram believes him. But Sarah is a little bit more impatient, right? Sure, her faith is not quite there yet. So she's beginning to get a little antsy about it. She said, God has prevented me from having children. Go into my servant. It may be that I shall obtain children by her. All right. Now that would have been, let's see. I can give you these later. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna get this. Let's go back because this is on this slide. Abram and Sarah should have understood that it included your very own son shall be your heir. Remember, because God gave one man and one woman to be husband and wife, they should have understood that if if God says that the son is going to come from you, that it would come from you and Sarai. They should have understood that. That should have been a no-brainer, because God said a husband and a wife. There should be nobody else in that equation. Okay? So make sure we understand that. They didn't, and that led to their assisting God, which resulted in Ishmael. So, all right. Like I said, we can go back to these. I want to go and bring these up. So in verse 16 and verse 3, so after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian, her servant, and gave her to Abram, her husband, as a wife. So, go into my servant that I may obtain children by her. This is a corruption of what God's intent is. Okay? This is a corruption. This does not preclude people from adopting children from people who can't take care of them. That's not what we're talking about here. We got to remember the position that Hagar and Sarai occupied, I should say. All right? Sarai was the wife of the most powerful patriarch in this area. Okay? She had a position as wife, which gave her a level of privilege and prestige. She had a servant, Hagar. The servant position here is one of absolute and total obedience. So I want you to think about the position, what's going on here. Here you have this woman who has utmost authority over her servant. It's been given to her by her husband. She, in abusing her position, takes this young woman and makes her, essentially forces her to go into her husband and tells her husband to take this woman and have sexual relations with her so that she can have children by her. So I want you to think about the power. The power dynamic here is all wrong. do you believe that God would be happy with what's going on right here? I don't believe He's happy at all with it. He allows it to happen, but guess what? He allows us to sin. He gives us free will, and He allows us to happen. Remember that nothing is going to thwart His plan. His plan is that Abram is going to have a child by his wife Sarai, all right? And that is going to be the issue that is going to inherit this covenant promise that God's issued to Abram. Okay, so nothing's going to change that. So anything that happens is incidental to that main promise that He's delivered up. So what they're doing is they are corrupting a relationship. I want you to think about this. Why would with that in mind, was Hagar really a wife to Abram? Was she technically a wife to Abram? No, she was not. She could call it that all she wants. You can call it anything you want to all you want. But at the end of the day, she was not Abram's wife. Abram had one wife. That was Sarai. And they corrupted it. So I want you to think about that. Why would Sarai sell her marriage bed so cheaply? Because that's exactly what she did. Why was that drive? Think about the drive that would cause someone to do that. Now, I've heard the idea of the maternal instinct, and I'm married to a woman, and my wife, when it got to a certain point in time, she was ready to have children, and she wanted a baby, and she let me know she wanted a baby. And I kept, we tried to work it out we had a timeline in mind, and that's how we worked it out. But she let me know, I'm ready to have children. I want to have children. All of her friends were having children. People at the church were having children. Her sister had gotten pregnant, and now it's time. So now we also have to give Sarah a little bit of a break, because remember, how old is she when she finally gets pregnant with Isaac? 90 years old. Man. I mean, she's lived 90 years, and the entire time living in this camp where all she hears is servants getting married and having children. So she hears children playing and running around and having fun with one another, and all the while, that maternal instinct is still churning and churning and churning. How many nights has she cried herself to sleep because she could not have children? In her mind, God has prevented her from having children. So now, she's trying to have faith in a God that she believes is preventing her from having something that in her mind makes her finally a wife to Abram. Before this, she's simply a live-in lover, okay? But with the birth of that child, that's when that whole cycle comes complete. So while we look at this and it's reprehensible behavior, and God's people are certainly capable of reprehensible behavior, we also have to look at the mindset that's going on. It's been going on since she was old enough to have children. So when by the time she got married to the time that Isaac was born, it's likely close to, 75 years. And she's just been waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. So I just want us to be kindly towards Sarah, even though the conduct that she's engaging in here now is certainly not what God has intended, and it was really a horrible thing to do to this young lady, this young woman. Hagar, if Hagar was going to have children, Sarai and Abram should have given her in marriage to somebody else in that household. She should have been married and had children and gone about things the right way, but she took her and essentially sold her marriage bed to take this young woman and make her pregnant by her husband. It's just a horrible situation. It's not what God had in mind, okay? So another thing is, where's Abram's faith? Because Abram listened to her. It says that he listened to her, which means that he did what she told him to do. So Abram had a position here as well. He had the right to say, look, I understand. God's promised something. Let's be patient. I know you've been patient for 75 years. Let's be patient a little while longer. And just give it some time, give it some time, give it some time. So Abram does not behave in the proper manner here as well. He simply should have said, no, I'm not going to do this. You can be mad. You can not want to talk to me. You give me the silent treatment. That's fine. But I'm not going to do what it is you're wanting me to do. So what does he do, though? He goes in, he does what he says, he does what she tells him to do. And he went into Hagar, and she conceived. The idea of went into her, he went and had relations with her, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress. I want us to be careful about what we look at. the idea here that she looked with contempt, this could certainly mean that she's saying, hey, I'm pregnant and you're not. But I think probably a better way to look at this is that she sees the dishonorable conduct that Sarai is engaging in. That she has no, I'm trying to think of the right word. She has no say-so in this. She's forced to do what her mistress says to do. And she went in with this old man that she had no business being with. And now she's pregnant by the patriarch of this big family, knowing full well that she is never going to occupy the position of wife to this man. She is merely a vessel with which to give birth to a child to this man and this woman who have utter control over her and everything about her. Okay, I want us to make sure that we look at this the right way. Her bad behavior is on full display. And the idea that she looked with contempt, she saw that her mistress's conduct was dishonorable. Okay? All right, so Sarah says to Abram, may the wrong done to me be on you. McClintock and Strong give us Sarai's name as meaning contentious. It's said that Sarai and Sarah are both mean princess. With what's going on here, I fully endorse the idea of McClintock and Strong. She was a contentious woman. Because look what she's doing. I know I did this, but now look at the way that she's treating me, the way that she's looking at me. This is your fault. This is on you. May the wrong done to me be on you. I gave my servant to your embrace. Well, you had no business doing that anyway, Sarah. May the Lord judge between you and me. So just poor behavior all the way around on her part. And Abram has not done any better. He had no business doing what he did. But Abram says to Sarah, behold, your servant is in your power. Do it to her as you please. And Sarah dealt harshly with her, and she fled from her. Again, God's people fully capable of doing reprehensible things, despicable things. If anything, at this point, Abram should have removed her and given her some protection, but he doesn't. He gives her fully into the hands of Sarah, who was angry. She's angry at everybody. She's angry at Abram. She's angry at Hagar. She's angry at God. She's angry with everything. And while we may look at it and say, I understand why there's a difference between being angry and not sinning in your anger. And this is what she's doing. She's being angry and she's sinning in her behavior. So Sarah dealt harshly with her. It doesn't say, it could be that she was physically abusive, certainly so. I mean, she had every right to beat her servant. That was the right that a master had over the servant. Shouldn't have done that, but she had the right to do that. So it could be that it was physically abusive. It could be that horrible verbal abuse that people are capable of delivering to one another. The passive-aggressive catty behavior. I don't know. But it says she dealt harshly with her. It was to the point where she may have even feared for her own safety. So what does she do? She takes off and she runs. Understandable. That's what I would have done. So the angel of the Lord finds her by a spring of water in the wilderness. And the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, the angel says to her, Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? I think when angels do this kind of thing, it's simply to establish the matter for anybody that might be reading this. She says, I am fleeing from my mistress Sarai. The angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit to her. Now, I want you to think about that, what that would have taken, the kind of internal strength, the intestinal fortitude it would take to return to a woman that treats you with contempt, is angry with you, dealing harshly with you, to return to her, not just return to the camp, but return to your mistress and submit to her with everything that might entail. This shows an incredible strength on the part of Hagar to say, okay, I'll do it. I'll do it. Now, he doesn't send her away with nothing, because look at what he says. He says, the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit. The angel of the Lord also said to her, I will surely multiply your offspring so that they cannot be numbered for multitude. How is it that this angel of the Lord, speaking on behalf of God, how is her offspring going to multiply? Through who? Who's this going to come through? The child, right? The child right here. Okay? That's how her offspring are going to multiply. Through the child that is in her womb, Ishmael. So the Lord is giving her a promise he's giving Hagar a nation promise that's going to come through her son. He said, the angel of the Lord said to her, behold, you are pregnant and shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael. So he's giving her the name. The Lord has listened to your affliction. He shall be I love the description of Ishmael. He shall be a wild donkey of a man. I thought about that, and you think about, what do you think, what idea do you think, what does that conjure up in your brain? What kind of image does that bring to our head when he says he's going to be a wild donkey of a man?
Hard-headed.
Hard-headed, stubborn. What else? What's that?
I said Tarzan.
What's Hardy?
Like Tarzan.
Oh, okay. Has anybody ever owned a donkey? Anybody here ever owned a donkey? Okay. I've always wanted to own a donkey, and I still think that's on my bucket list. I really want to own a donkey. I think they're just incredible creatures. But if you look at what a donkey, and it says a wild donkey of a man. This is one that will not take a load, will not shoulder a burden. A wild donkey is like, no. A domesticated donkey, they'll carry stuff for you, but a wild donkey, you're not going to burden me. You're not going to exercise control over me. I'm going to do what I want to do. And I think this is what he's talking about with Ishmael. Ishmael's not going to be submissive to anyone. He's going to be his own man. He's going to be his own person. He's going to, and he says, his hand against everyone. And part of that is a foretelling of what's going to happen with the descendants of Ishmael and their interaction with the descendants of Isaac. Okay, so you have two brothers, different mothers, same father, and the descendants of those two brothers are going to come into contact with one another, and it's more often than not going to be contentious and disagreeable and violent. There's going to be wars waged. And if you think about that, even today that still occurs, because the descendants of Ishmael are where the Arab and the Muslims come from. And then you have the descendants of Isaac, the Jews. So you've got, and you think about it, they said that Abram's descendants are going to be like the stars in the sky. And at one point they were so numerous and so great, they were without number. And now, how many Jews are there in the world? Still a lot. But if you look at those numbers, do the Arab Muslims far outnumber the Jews in the world? By a lot. By a lot. So it kind of flipped things on its head. So his hand's going to be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. There's just going to be conflict between these two groups. And he shall dwell over against all of his kinsmen. All right? So she calls the name of the Lord who spoke to her. You are, this is Hagar making a confession about God. Says, you are a God of seeing. For she said, truly here I have seen him who looks after me. So today, when we think about that, I think this is a great confession about who God is. God is a God of seeing. If a sparrow doesn't fall without his notice, we can't escape his notice. And that's a sword that cuts two ways, because not only does he see us, but he sees us. So when we do wrong, he sees us. When we do the right thing, he sees us. He knows who we are. He remembers us. He takes care of us. We are constantly in his thoughts. It's a matter of he always has us in mind in whatever's going on. When we pray, he hears us. When we ask him for things, he hears us. When we go, he sees us. All of this. All right, so she makes this really a great confession concerning Jehovah. So seeing is just more than taking notice of something. It's actually seeing, being aware of something. All right, so God decides that this little child, this innocent child that's still in his mother's womb, and the mother is not going to suffer under Sarai's yoke forever. And he sees what Sarai's doing. He knows what's going on, and he says, "This is not going to continue forever. I'm going to make of your son a great nation." And the tribes which arose from Ishmael include the Arab tribes. 3,500 years of war and bloodshed, because Abram and Sarah couldn't be patient. That's what it comes down to. 3,500 years of bloodshed, because they couldn't just wait the way God says to wait. All right? C'est la vie, right? Okay, so let's go to our next chapter 17. All right. When Abram was 99 years old, The Lord appears to him and says to him, I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless. What does blameless mean, the idea of blameless? Our elders are told to be blameless. What does that really mean? Does it mean sinless?
Walking in the light, doing right.
Okay. It means that if a charge is leveled against an elder, if a charge is leveled against Abraham, it won't stick. Because everybody knows. It's like, no, he wouldn't do that. He wouldn't do that. I don't believe it. You're going to have to prove that to me with proofs, because I do not believe what you're telling me about this man. That's a pretty strong compliment, and I think it's indicative of the care that God takes in choosing leaders for His people. So He tells Abram, I want you to be blameless. I want you to walk in the way I tell you to walk, so that when people say, "Oh, Abram is this way," they'll say, "No, he's not. I know him." That makes absolutely no sense in what I understand and what I know about him. Sometimes that doesn't always pan out. One of the worst things I ever came across within the Lord's church was I found out I was playing golf, and I found out that someone used to play golf with somebody that I knew very well, and I thought I knew them very well, and they said, "Oh yeah, that guy, I play golf with him. He's a this, that, and the other," and I could not believe that he was like that, and I didn't believe that he was like that. And they had to prove it to me. They did. They proved that he was the kind of person that they said he was. And it was so disappointing. But for that brief period of time, I simply just didn't believe it, because I thought I knew him very well because of the image that he projected to me and the other people that I knew. But here he's telling Abram, this is what I want you to do. He says, I want you to walk before me. The idea that I want you to walk before me in the path that I set for you is what he means here. Walk before me. I'm going to set a path for you. You're going to walk down that path, and I want you to be blameless. I don't want anybody to be able to accuse you of something. That I may make my covenant between me and you and may multiply you greatly. So he's reiterating this contract, this covenant that he cut with him many years before. And Abram fell on his face. God said to him, behold, my covenant was with you, and you shall be the father of a multitude of nations. And he changes his name at this point. No longer shall your name be called Abram, but your name shall be Abraham. For I made you the father of a multitude of nations. How is this so? Because I thought that it all came down to the nation of Israel. How is Abraham the father of many nations? In what way? It's not the nation promise. It's not the land promise. How did God make Abraham the father of many nations? Which promise was it?
Offspring.
The seed. It was the seed promise. The seed promise. It's the seed promise. That's how all the nations of the world are going to be drawn to that Messiah. And they're all going to come, and they're all going to call upon the name of the Lord. Now, what I mean by all of them, I mean that the word of the Lord went out into all the nations. And I mean, if we simply look at the day of Pentecost, look at all of those countries that were listed when that sermon went out on the first day on the day of Pentecost. All of these people, he says, I see people of this country, and this country, and this country, and this country. And what happened? They went back to their countries, and they proclaimed the message of Jesus Christ. And the nations of the world were slowly being pulled and being attracted and being drawn to God through His Son, Jesus Christ. So the idea that He's going to be the father of many nations, it comes through the seed promise that He delivered to them through the Messiah. I will make you exceedingly fruitful. Now, this is in the here and now. He says, I'm going to make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make you into nations, and kings shall come from you. I will establish my covenant between me and you and your offspring after you throughout their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and to your offspring after you. I will give to you and your offspring the land of your sojourning. So now he's in Canaan, he's going up and down, and he'll go here, and he'll pasture here, and then he'll go over here. And he said, all of these places that you traveled, in all of your travelings through Canaan, from the time you came out of Haran, right outside of Ur, all the way down into Egypt, and then back up, and then back down, and back everywhere you've seen, I'm going to give you all of this land that you've seen. Now, is Abraham going to see a bit of that? Is Abraham ever going to be a citizen of the nation of Israel? No. He dies before that occurs. But I think it's interesting because essentially God is saying, as far as I'm concerned, it's already done. It's already been accomplished because I've promised it. And I think that's the point that he's trying to make. Because I've said it, it's as good as accomplished. All right? Verse 9, God says to Abraham, as for you shall keep my covenant, you and your offspring. This is my covenant, verse 10, which you shall keep between me and you and your offspring after you. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskins, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you. Notice that it is not the covenant. Circumcision is not the covenant. Circumcision is a sign of the covenant. How do you get into the covenant?
Circumcised.
Oh,
Offspring. Born into it.
you're born into it. You are a part of the covenant by birth. Circumcision comes in 8 days later, and it is a sign. That's what it is. It's like giving every male a little name tag. I'm part of the covenant. Name tag you can't take off. It's there forever. But that's the whole point behind it. It shows it's a sign of the covenant. He who is 8 days old among you shall be circumcised, every male throughout your generations, whether born in your house or bought with your money from any foreigner who is not of your offspring. This is interesting. Because a lot of times these guys would purchase, they would have servants come into their household from outside. And many times these servants were pagans, they were heathen, they had nothing to do with God, they didn't even understand the idea of one God. Most of them came from polytheistic societies. They had multiple gods that they worshipped and they offered up to. So it didn't matter who you were. If you were part of the household, you were circumcised. Both he is born in your house and he who is bought with your money, so shall my covenant be in your flesh, an everlasting covenant. Any uncircumcised male who is not circumcised in the flesh shall be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant. All right. So he establishes this right. It's a sign of a covenant. So let's look at this. What are we have two covenants here, right? We have the Abrahamic covenant that God gives up to him, and then we have the Messianic covenant that God gives to us today. So there's some correlations here. Let's look at a couple of those real quick. The Abrahamic one is that you were born of flesh, right? You were added to the covenant by virtue of you were born to somebody that was born to somebody that was born to somebody, going all the way back in perpetuity to that establishment of that covenant. That's how you were added to it. The Messianic covenant, how are we added to that covenant? We're born of it, right? But how are we born of it? Right. All right. In the Abrahamic, this is interesting. We become a child, we're born, and then we learn the law. In the Messianic covenant, we learn the law, and then we become a child. Become a babe in Christ. I always thought that was just so poetic. It's just beautiful. First you're a kid, and then you learn the law under Moses, and then under Jesus you learn the law, and then you become a child. Under the Abrahamic, there's a physical sign of the covenant. Physical sign. All right? Circumcision. Under the Messianic covenant, there's a spiritual sign of belonging. Baptism. I have no idea if you've been baptized or not unless you tell me. It's not physical. I can't inspect you and go, yeah, you're good. No. It's a spiritual sign. You've gone down into the water, you come back up, that's a sign of your participating in the covenant. But I can't see it. It's strictly a spiritual thing. In Abrahamic, you were only born through lineage, and in the Messianic covenant, everyone is welcome. I'll wait until everybody gets it down. Anybody still writing it down? Okay, good. All right, let's continue on. All right, so let's look at the circumcision similarities to baptism. Because a lot of people want to draw very strict similarities between the two. And there are some similarities between the two. Let's think about this. Similarities, in this case, it's mandatory. All right, it's mandatory. Under the old law, it was mandatory for males. Only for males, right? Women couldn't be circumcised. It was a symbol for men only. But today, it's for everyone, but it's still mandatory. It has to happen. You cannot be part of the new covenant with God and refuse the rite of baptism. Under the old law, you can say, well, I'm part of the covenant. Well, you have to be circumcised. Nope. Or if the parents refuse to allow the child to be circumcised. Nope. If you want to be a part of this covenant, you have to have the sign of the covenant. All right. Number 2, if you did not comply, you were cut off from the covenant. As I just said. Today, what about today? If you don't comply, if you don't go down into that water, we cannot consider you rightfully part of the covenant of Christ. As much as we love you, as much as we pray for you, as much as we're glad that you understand, you have understanding in your heart, if you don't go down into that water, I cannot consider you a child of God. I can't do it. And number 3, it did not take the place of obedience to God's commandments. In other words, you couldn't, under the old law, you could not be circumcised, but then disobey the law, disregard the law. The same today. We can go down into the water, but when we come up out of that water, we've had that spiritual circumcision, so to speak. Do we still have an obligation to be in obedience to the law of Christ and God's commandments? Yes. We can't simply say, well, I'm part of it, I don't have to do anything else. And there are lots of folks who do that. I've had the misfortune of not misfortune of baptizing, but I've had the misfortune of baptizing somebody, being so excited about it, and they come up out of that water and they proclaim Christ. They say they're a new creature, and then they disregard everything that we try to instruct them in. They don't come to church. They don't obey, and then pretty soon they're gone. In the words that we use today, they ghost us, and we never see them again. And what's sad is they were most likely going through life thinking that because they went down into that water, they're fine. They don't have to worry about anything else. And that's just not the case. Obedience to commandments are still in place, regardless under the old law or under the new. All right, the differences. A couple of differences. Number 1 is for men only under the old law. Today, baptism is for everybody. I can't be baptized for my wife. My wife can't be baptized for me. Number 2, it was performed on infant non-believers. And under the new law, baptism isn't performed on anybody. It's the act of us towards God. Does that mean, does it make any difference who baptizes me? Pretty much no. That's not the important thing. The important thing is that it's an act of my conscience towards God. So in those days, you had this baby, 8 days old, it can't consent or to anything. In fact, if that child could consent or not consent, most likely it wouldn't consent. But it was performed on them. Baptism isn't performed on us. I can't grab somebody off the street, push them down into the water, bring them back up, and call them a child of God. Not only that, I'd be sued for assault, be arrested for assault. Of course, there are those who believe that even today, circumcision is an assault and it should be prosecuted. So, does it affect us today? No, it doesn't, one way or another. Not spiritually. Number 3, circumcision was not connected with the forgiveness of sin. It was a sign of the covenant. And baptism does. Baptism does what? It washes away our sins, figuratively speaking. So baptism washes away sins. So those are some of the differences, as well as some of the similarities. All right? So, let's look at this. Verse 8, verse 15. Did everybody get that? I'm sorry. I want to make sure everybody got that. Yes? Awesome. All right. All right, chapter 17, verse 15. God says to Abraham, "As for Sarah, your wife, you shall not call her name Sarah, but Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name." Sarah meaning contentious, Sarah meaning princess. "I will bless her, and moreover, I will give you a son by her. I will bless her, and she shall become nations. Kings of people shall come from her." Again, that gets back to not only the nation promise that God is going to have multiple descendants of Abraham, but there's also going to come kingdoms and kings and nations that are going to come from Abraham through the establishment of Christ as the Messiah. All right? So Abraham falls on his face and laughs. And says to himself, "Shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old?" And every time you think Abram's got a hold of his faith, he goes and does something like this. But again, I hesitate to throw rocks at Abraham in this. I mean, this is hard stuff. It's hard to see. It's hard to understand. The idea of the power of God being manifested in this way. Now, he's going to see a manifestation of God's power with the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, because it says he's going to look out and he's going to see the smoke coming up from the plain like a furnace. So he's about to see the manifest power of God, but this is in such an unusual way. He's going to allow this man and this woman he's 100, she's 90, and they're going to have a baby. This is it's unheard of. It's never been heard of before. I don't think it's ever been heard of since, as far as I know. But he falls on his face and he laughs. And Abraham said to God, "Oh, that Ishmael may live before you." Now, I want to make sure that it doesn't appear to me, in all of my reading and my research, it doesn't appear to me anyway, that Abraham is trying to substitute Ishmael for the child that's going to come after him. The child that Sarah is going to give birth to. It doesn't appear that he's trying to substitute this. I think what Abraham is concerned, that if he has this son by Sarai, knowing her and her behavior, is this going to present a problem for this son Ishmael? He's concerned. It's like, what's going to happen to my other son by Hagar? Is he going to be somehow cast aside? Is he going to be, what's going to happen? And I think this is the case here. I don't think it's Abraham trying to substitute him. I think he's just concerned for Ishmael's place. So God says, "No, hold on, no, don't worry. As for Ishmael, I have heard you. Behold, I have blessed him and will make him fruitful and multiply him greatly. He shall father 12 princes." This corresponds right to the 12 nations, tribes are going to issue out of Abraham and Isaac. So he says, "I'm going to make of him a great nation. I'm going to multiply him greatly, 12 princes, and I will make him into a great nation. But I will establish my covenant," the nation covenant, the land covenant, it's going to continue from you to Isaac and then to Jacob. "But I will establish my covenant with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear to you at this time next year." All right. So he affirms that the nation promise is going to come to fruition through her offspring and not Ishmael. So after he finishes up with this, Abraham obeys God in the institution of the rite of circumcision. He's 99 years old at this time. All of the men of the household. It does not necessarily mean that they share Abraham's faith, although it's probable that most of them did, because they've seen God's manifest blessings on Abram throughout the years that they've been with him. And I doubt very seriously that Abram was going through his day and not making known to the people that he was around Jehovah God. I mean, it shows that he was a righteous man who walked righteously. So it was probably part of everything that he did. They certainly had seen him sacrificing. They'd certainly seen him doing all of the things that you would normally do as a child of God, as a man of God. So it's likely that many of them, even if they didn't completely understand God, because God didn't appear to them, it's entirely probable that they did understand who this Jehovah was that God worshipped and sacrificed to, the one that was blessing him with all of these things, and they kept seeing him get bigger and bigger and greater and greater. But it doesn't change anything. If you were in that household, whether you were born into it or whether you were bought and you became part of that household, you were going to be circumcised. And to not be circumcised, as we see here, means that it would make them unclean before God. It made them, they were not part anymore. They would be cut off. Almost akin to heathen. So Abraham is 99 years old. Ishmael is 13 years old. He's circumcised, which also means that he is part of the covenant. I think sometimes we think that Ishmael just sort of vanishes off the face of the planet and he was never a part of it. He was part of the covenant. So he was circumcised as a part of that covenant. He came from Abraham. But we also know that his descendants are going to sink into idolatry and wickedness throughout the years, and that was a sad thing about the whole thing. It wouldn't have been so incredible to have two great nations, all of them calling upon Jehovah God, with all of them engaging in the various parts of worship to God, but they didn't. All right, so let's go to chapter 18. Anybody got anything they want to add? I don't want to. Somebody's got something they want to ask or say or bring up. Okay. All right. 3 men appear to Abraham. I want you to look. 18 verse 1 is key to 18 verse 2. The Lord appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre as he sat at the door of his tent in the heat of the day. So he's just sort of taking his leisure, letting maybe a cool breeze blow through. He's just sort of relaxing. This is part of being a 99-year-old patriarch, right? You know, you have the right to sit back and watch as your servants and your household do the things, and you get to watch and supervise and enjoy a time of your life, which normally that's about what you'd be doing. You would be enjoying that time of life. So he's sitting there just enjoying, sitting in the tent, and he lifts up his eyes and looked, and it said 18:1 informs 18:2. He lifts up his eyes and look, and behold, 3 men were standing in front of him. So when it says the Lord appeared to him by the oaks, when those 3 men, what can we reasonably assume? That one of those men is what?
God.
It's God. Now, here's the thing. Who is God in the flesh?
Jesus.
It's Jesus Christ, without exception. If God is in the flesh, when God appears in the flesh, it's Christ. Okay? So this is, as almost every biblical scholar will tell you, this is an appearance of the pre-incarnate Christ. Now that's called a theophany. Just a fancy word. Theophany. It's God appearing in the flesh. But when God appears in the flesh, man can't see God. It's impossible for man to look upon God and live. So what does he do? He must assume an earthly form. Same with these angels. And we know that these are men. We know that these are physical men because of what they do. All right? So what does he do? He sees them. He runs from the tent door. He bows himself to the earth. Now at this point, is he aware that this is God? It doesn't show that he's aware that this is God at this point. These are just 3 strangers. This is part of the idea of hospitality in this culture. Hospitality was an enormous part of this culture in this day and age. You know, we talk about Southern hospitality. Folks, we got nothing on these folks. It was when a stranger showed up, everything got dropped, and you outdid yourself doing whatever you possibly could to make sure that person felt welcome and safe and secure. Now we see where this is perverted in the case of Lot and the 2 men that come into Sodom. But at this point, Abraham is just showing hospitality to these 3 men. He says, "Oh Lord." Now, the idea of Lord, this is a lowercase l, so this is not, "Oh God." This is, he's acknowledging him in again, that idea of humbling himself before visitors and strangers. "If I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought, wash your feet, rest yourself under the tree. I'm going to bring some food." You know, kind of like if you go to somebody's house now, when you go to somebody's house in the South, what do they do? Bring out a coffee and a pound cake. Man, if you can get that, you've accomplished something. So this is what I'm going to do. Sit down, I'm going to bring some water. Some of my servants are going to come and wash your feet. I'm going to go get some food. Now just take your ease, all right? After you may refresh yourself, and then you can keep moving on, but don't go anywhere. So they said, "Do as you said." So Abraham went to the tent, told Sarah, quick, doubtful she was doing the cooking. That's why she's got servants. So she's taking care of that part of the hospitality. He's going to go out and make sure that his guests feel at home. So he goes to the herd and he takes a calf and he gives it to a young man who prepared it quickly. I don't know how long it takes to prepare a calf. I mean, that's a big piece of meat. So it's likely these guys were sitting around for a while this food was being prepared, but they're happy to do so. There's a purpose behind them being here. So he takes curds and milk and the calf that he prepared and set it before them. And this is how we know that they are physical people. He stood by them under the tree while they did what? They ate. So they were taking physical nourishment. These were physical bodies taking physical nourishment. But you know what? When God came to the earth in flesh in the person of Jesus Christ, did he eat? Lots. Went to a wedding. Made wine. Had observed at least 3 Passovers with his followers. So these are people that are in the flesh. All right? So they said to him, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" And he said, "She's in the tent." And look at this. And the Lord said, so one of these 3 men is God in flesh. The Lord said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, shall have a son." All right, here's the big thing we talk about all the time. Sarah was listening at the tent door behind him. Now they were old, advanced in years. The way of women had ceased to be with Sarah. She was not able to have children in any other way other than miraculous. So Sarah laughs to herself, saying, "After I am worn out and my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure?" What's the pleasure?
Child.
The child. She's been waiting on for 90, well, not 90 years, but close to 90 years. She's been waiting to have a child to offer as part of her wifely duties to her husband. This is a big, big, big deal. Okay, and she says, I don't know. What do you think? You think she was laughing because she thought it was impossible, or do you think she was laughing because it was just sort of like an unconscious gesture of just being so shocked and surprised at being told this is going to happen?
Seems to be the negative side because of the way the Lord answers.
Okay, he said, Sarah was listening. Okay, verse 13. The Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Shall I indeed bear a child now that I'm old?'" I like this because I think this is the most important part of this, and this is what we mentioned earlier. Is anything too hard for the Lord? Man, that's a big question. That's something we need to ask all the time. How many times have we been involved in a project at church and we thought, hey, we're going to do this, and we think, we've tried that before. We did that before and it didn't work. But what about this? And we begin to make excuses as to why it can't happen. And we're very quick to say, well, the Lord won't let it happen. But what are we doing when we offer up excuses? We're essentially saying the Lord can't accomplish this thing. That's what we're saying when we offer up unreasonable excuses as to why certain thing cannot happen. It cannot occur. We'll never be able to pull this off. And what we're doing is we're saying, the Lord can't do it. And we're careful not to say those words. That's essentially what we're doing. He said, why did she laugh? Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will return to you about this time next year, and Sarah shall have a son. But Sarah denied it. So I might agree with you, Tate. The idea that she might have done it as just sort of I'm 9 years old. I'm done. I'm frustrated. It's not going to happen. I've waited and I've waited. Always looking at her timeline, and simply said, it's not going to happen. And she laughs. And the Lord said, in spite of what you just did, it's going to happen. Try laughing then. Try being 90 years old and getting up at 2 in the morning for feeding a baby. I wouldn't want to do it now. I'm 55. The idea of getting up at 2 o'clock in the morning feeding a child, oh man. Imagine being 90 years old and doing it. But Sarah denies it, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. He said, no, but you did laugh. So I think it was just I don't want to throw rocks at Sarah, but she's thinking, no, not going to happen. Not going to happen. All right, verse 16, the men set up, there's two reasons for their presence. I got to look at my own slide. 2 reasons for their presence. Number 1, to announce the coming of this child of promise, to lend weight to it. It wasn't merely God said to Abraham in a voice at night. He shows up himself to tell them they're going to have a baby. He's been telling them and telling them and telling them and telling them. Now he's showing up to saying, okay, this is it. Around this time next year, and this year gives that a little extra amount of time for that baby to be conceived and to gestate and to grow and to become a full-fledged infant in her womb and then to be delivered. So they're lending weight to the pronouncement of this coming of Isaac, this child of promise that they've been waiting on for so long. And this kind of goes into the correlation of the angel in Luke chapter 1, verses 30 through 33. And I ask that question, what is more miraculous? To have a baby at 90? Or to have a baby as a virgin? Both of them are pretty much impossible without the power of God. Shows that He is in control. Again, these guys are players on a stage. They are supporting characters. God is the main thing here. And God said that from the very beginning that I've got a mind so far down the road that you can't quite grasp what I'm thinking. But you're all going to play a part in it in some way, shape, or form. All right? I'm going to return to you about this time next year. So at this point, Abraham is given to know that these men are special. This is not just 3 strangers, just not just 3 average men who may be traveling down that road. These are special men. All right? And the second one said there's 2 reasons. One, to give weight to the pronouncement of the coming of Isaac. The second one is the Lord wants Abraham to know about the punishment of the cities on the plain. And look at verse 16. Then the men set out from there, all 3 of them, and they looked down towards Sodom. And Abraham went with them to set them on their way. Kind of like, you walk somebody down the driveway to their car. He's just going to walk them a little ways, make sure they get where they're going, and eventually he'll wave goodbye to them and tell them to come back sometime. But the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? Seeing that Abraham will be a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I think this is a really salient point. For I have chosen him that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has promised him. So I want you to look at that, what he says. He says, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? Seeing what he is going to be and what he's going to accomplish and what he's going to do. So think about this. This corresponds to the land of Canaan. God is going to destroy them due to their sin, and as an example to witnesses about his righteousness and mercy. He wants Abraham to know what he's going to do. He wants Abraham to know that he is a God of justice. He is a God of righteousness. Also that he is a God of mercy, because think about this. When God tells Abraham what he's going to do, what does Abraham attempt to do with God? He attempts to bargain with him. He knows that God is a merciful God. And he attempts to reach out to that part of God. He says, I know their sin. Believe me, I know their sin. I know what they're up to, and I know they're up to no good. But would you, and let's go ahead and get into this, would you destroy these cities? Would you destroy it for 50 people? And he says, no. If there are 50 righteous people, I will not destroy the city. Is God faithful concerning his promise? Yeah. If he says if there's 50 and he won't do it, he won't do it. Then he goes down, what about there's 40? And you look at the entire time they're bargaining. I'll just call it bargaining. The entire time they're doing that, Abraham is making sure that God knows, look, I'm not attempting, this is not an attempt from equal to equal. I know who you are. I am nothing. I am dust and ashes, but I'm still coming to you because I know who you are. I think that's powerful stuff. The idea how we approach God. We have to know we're not equals with God. I can't stand up and say, shake my fist and demand stuff from God, demand things from God, and require things from him. I come to him knowing full well who I am. I'm an inferior speaking to a far superior. But the great thing about it is, in no other case would that be possible. In no other case would that be possible. Only with God. God, the supreme sovereign of the universe and everything in it, listens to me. That's impressive. It boggles the mind, the fact that this being of ultimate power and authority, and he when I close my eyes and I fold my hands and I go to him with a contrite heart, he actually hears what I'm saying. It's phenomenal stuff. Abraham knows it, and that's why he goes to him and makes full well he understands. Look, I'm nothing, but would you do it for this? And he bargains him all the way down to what? Goes from 50 all the way down to 10. 10 people. If there's 10 people, I won't do it. Now, at this point, two of the angels have gone on. God is remaining with Abraham to speak with him and let him know what's going to be happening. So the two angels are continuing down the road to Sodom. It's interesting that they get there. It's like a 2-day journey from where Abraham is to Sodom. They get there by the evening time. So that shows the miraculous nature of these two guys. At evening time, these two men are striding into Sodom right when the sun is getting ready to set, and right when it's time to find a place to take shelter for the night. We're not going to get to it tonight, but God stays behind to talk to Abraham, and he says, if I find 10, I'll spare it. But then that closes that. God, Abraham doesn't know whether that's going to happen or not. He merely makes the bargain with God. God agrees to spare the city for 10 people, but then Abraham is just simply saying, well, I hope he finds 10 people. And in the back of Abraham's mind, he's probably thinking, well, there's Lot and his wife and their kids. Surely those 10, and maybe that's part of his idea, is thinking, is that, well, at least my family, I know my family would be, I know they're righteous in that regard, so maybe simply by my own nephew and his family being there, that will make up the 10 and he won't destroy it. I like that because it shows that Abraham's still thinking about people other than himself. They're of concern to him. And I think it's an important thing to think about. All right, let's finish there because we're not going to get any further. Next week we'll pick up in chapter 19, and then we should be back on track. Anybody got anything they want to add before we close out?
I'm just thinking, God knows the whole time. He knows what's going on in that city.
Sure.
He knows there's not gonna be 10 people there.
Yeah.
But he's gonna go along with it.
But and I think that shows. I think that shows a sort of a tenderness and a love for Abraham. He lets Abraham know that I'm not a God that doesn't show mercy. I'm not a God that doesn't care. And if there were 10 people, then I absolutely would. But did God know that there were not going to be 10 people? If God wanted to know, He would absolutely know immediately if there were 10 people. But I think that shows a great deal of love, and it shows a concern for Abraham's mindset and well-being. That's the same with us today, right? He's cared for us. He cares for us, in spite of the fact that we often disappoint Him. All right. Thanks, folks. Appreciate it. We'll see you next week. Oh, real quick, I told David I'm going to tell you, I will be going to the Freed Hardeman lectureships. I've got something to do there, so I won't be here for